All right, hey Quants. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a video because I was really trying to hold to making a video related to AI content. If you recall, in my last video, I said I was going to do a video about the comparison between the Gen 3 editors. In particular, I wanted to look at T3 code. I wanted to look at the cursor glass one, which actually kind of couples into just the cursor editor. And then I also wanted to look at codecs. That is still on the docket, and as much as I wanted to get that out, I just was struggling to bring myself to set up a Windows environment or go back to my Windows environment where I could actually set up the codecs application. And so because it's been a while since I made a video, I just wanted to get out a video so I don't get totally washed out making videos and let this completely drop down. I promise I am going to make that AI video related to the 3 different editors. I do have setups for Windows to be able to do that. I think I mentioned I was probably going to do it on a Mac before, which I also do have a setup I can use for Mac, but because my daily driver is a machine that has a setup for Windows already, I will use that one, but I need to boot into that setup and make sure that everything's running over there before I do that. And so I've been working on a lot of stuff since then, and so I figured today will be a simple chart day because I want to dig into the charts a little bit and just see how things have been kind of progressing. I haven't been doing a lot of that, but I've got so many things going on, and so there's a lot of ways for you to stay in touch with me beyond just waiting for me to put out these videos, of course. I've got my X channel, which all this stuff is linked and will be linked in the description below. Again, using the Click Alchemy media generation tool that I use, and that is the use case that I'm going to be using in the future, where right now it just uses a base model. The default was to use Gemini. It was basically to use the pro model of Gemini, which is effectively Nano Banana. I haven't done any tests with the latest GBT Image 2 model, but from the initial tests, and it's been out for a few weeks now, the initial tests that I've seen, it's pretty darn good. And so one of the things that I don't like locking myself into is a specific model. And so the test case that I'm going to use for all 3 of these different editors is going to be adding a model picker through that. And so that should not be that big of a challenge, but it should still give us something to look at in terms of how the editors work. I've seen some other people doing like deeper dives of how codecs works and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into hey, this is how the editors work. I'm just going to go into hey, this is going to be a real feature I'm going to build. I'm going to release it, and it's a paid product, so this is something goes out into real production. And so that is still coming forward. The way that I'm gonna, one of the things I wanted to mention, and I decided to just go ahead and make a video so I could make sure that I'm still staying somewhat relevant in the YouTube space, is I wanted to mention that I will probably break this up into 2 videos, because one of the things that was kind of pulling me back is if I go over and I just record this on Windows or Mac, I've got to set up all the other things that I typically use so that I can test all 3 on the same platform, all in one video, typically in the manner that I like to do, which is just pretty raw. I don't do a lot of editing for my videos, and so I intend to do it that way with this implementation as well. The difference is that I'm going to use, I'm going to break it up into 2 videos. So I'm going to break it up into one video where I will do T3 code, and then I will also do the cursor agent glass implementation, and I'll just release that as one video, and then I'll do a follow-on video where I can record that, because that used to be my primary driver on the Windows setup, so I have most of the stuff there. I just have to make sure it's all updated, and then I'll do the codecs implementation there, and then that'll just break that up into 2 videos. And in the codecs video, I'll probably do that last, and I can just do a conclusion about like what my opinions are of these, or I might do that as like a third video, since both of those will happen differently and I'm not doing any editing. I might want a little bit of time to think about how the implementations come out or came out, and then give a little bit of feedback about my opinions and which ones I'm liking better. Some of the things that I've seen with the codecs editor looks like it's caught up quite a bit. I did mention in a perfect world, you have this, well, I don't know, some people's perfect world, probably mine in particular, I would have an editor where I could just do everything in this box, right? Which includes like browsing and stuff like that. And so the way I have a huge monitor, and so the way that I like to lay things out is I just like to make it really big, and then I have split screens. And so I'll use a tile editor, or depending on the operating system, I'll do some kind of a layout editor where I can have my screens mostly in columns. And then I can get probably 5 to 6 columns of applications, and I can see those usually pretty well without feeling too cramped. And so my point about that is if I have the apps that I tend to do that with is going to be like a window of testing in the application, maybe an ID, maybe a terminal application running the application, or doing git commits and things like that. I like to use the command line for that myself. I know some people like the editor flows. I personally don't. And then you have your code where you're actually looking at your code. And so having a large application that basically creates those column layouts would be ideal for me, rather than just having that be part of your operating system, although most operating systems have something like that you can do nowadays anyways. And so I say most operating systems, all the operating systems that I use have the ability to do that, although some of them require extensions to work the way that I like. So that was kind of a big, like, hey, things are coming. On that note, I just wanted to mention here, one of the features I've been working on, I just mentioned this in the Crown group. I know there's some, Revan, for example, has been working on his own optimizer. I believe he's writing that in Python. I have some other AI things that I'm working on that I think will be faster in terms of optimizations. But the other point about that is that I know everybody is generally, at least in the communities that I work with, they're generally using TradingView. And so even though I think it's better and faster to use something like Python, there is a level of simplicity that comes with using TradingView where you just get the UI, and you don't have to think about things like, where does my data source come from? What if I want to look at a different asset? I just go in there and I type in Apple or Tesla or gold or Bitcoin or Ethereum, whatever, and it just pops up the data set. It's there. You have your indicator on there, and it just does the analysis right there, or your strategy, it just gives you the results right there. That's very simple compared to something like Python or a lot of those backtesting libraries, where if you switch assets, if you don't already have the data set downloaded, or you don't have some kind of a live feed that pulls from a lot of different assets, that switching can be very complicated. I think in a very specific case, if you're working on trading and optimizing things in particular, that's probably fine, because you can just say, I'm testing Bitcoin. I have my one indicator that I use. Those are both in Python. I'm going to load them up. If I want to load up an additional asset, that's pretty easy. But if you're trying to do it across like 50 plus assets, it can become a little bit cumbersome, because I have yet to see good UIs written around that kind of thing. UI is kind of my forte, and so that might be something that I tie into this next AI product thing that I'm working on. But before that, I was pretty close to having a TradingView optimizer. There are other ones out there, and I did look at those, and of course, as a result of just looking at it, it's definitely shaped the opinion of how I've built the one that I have. But this is just a screenshot. One thing in particular that I've always wanted to pull forward that I've seen when I started getting into backtesting, and that is this surface plot. A lot of people will do it with a heat plot, and so this one will do both. But the whole point about that is that if you're comparing a couple of parameters, you can plot those like over the range of optimizations. And so if I say, I'm based on this, what's in this screenshot, I'm just going to say, I don't know what the threshold is or what the strategy is, but if I have an entry threshold of 70, whatever that may be, or maybe we should make it 30, just because a lot of times oscillators are generally low. And so we'll have an entry threshold as the parameter that we're optimizing. So if we have an entry threshold when the oscillator is low, we might want to optimize over the window of 10 to 30, and we would do that in steps of 1. So it's going to say, what does the strategy look like when it's 10? What does the strategy look like when it's 11? What does it look like when it's 12? And it's going to capture all that data. And then if you go to the exit threshold, let's again use that same concept of an oscillator. When you're going to enter at low and exit when it's high, you might want to iterate over a window of 70 to 90 with a step of 1, meaning when you're going to capture the strategy results when it's 70, you're going to then when it's 71, 72, 73, and you're going to get all those depending on the parameter you choose. Let's choose net profit because that's a common one. So I want the maximum net profit, that whichever combination of those parameter windows gives me the best results. And so you will find, whether it's a good strategy or a bad strategy, there's going to be an output that says this is the highest net profit. And so once you find that highest net profit, how do you know that value for the net profit that you got is a robust parameter? And one of the ways that you can help determine if it is a robust parameter is you can go in and you can check. If you were doing this manually, you would say, okay, using those same numbers, let's say the entry threshold of 20 and the exit threshold of 80, what were the optimal values? Obviously, I just picked those in the middle. This is a random example, so I just picked those in the middle. What I would say is if they're robust, I should expect to be able to have some wiggle room in those parameters. I wish my camera was out a little wider because then you could see me doing this. But anyways, if you give those a little bit of wiggle room, you should expect your strategies to still work and not completely fall off. Because if you change it from 20 to 21 and it just bombs, it went from like, oh, I had random numbers again. I had a net profit of $1,000, and then I change it one value and now I lose $1,000. Well, there it's not very robust, because if that slips just a little bit or the market changes just a little bit, it's not going to be very robust. And so what I've depicted here in this image, you might need to zoom in. I could zoom in this image, but I'm going to breaking something if I do that. So if you zoom in on, if you look at this surface plot, what this would tell you is what you really want. It tells you which one is the highest net profit. And so it's going to be this value up here. And I like the 3. You can do this with the heat map. And again, this does both. But I like the surface plot because it's very visual. It's super easy to see, okay, this is the highest peak on that surface graph. And so where you would want to be cautious is, as those parameters change, do you hit a cliff where you're just going to drop off? And if you have just a really narrow spike, that's the point that I was explaining. You could have a very high net profit in that area, but if you change it either way, any direction, there's a little bit of variance in the market, which you should expect, then your strategy is just going to explode. And so this can, in a negative way. And so this can help you get some insight into whether your strategy is, your parameters that you're selecting or optimizing for can be robust. So something else and so this is intended to work. It is a web extension. And so you would load up your chart that you expect. You're using the strategy. The common one in this case is probably going to be the skeleton key, or you might use the Rev and Ribbons. And so you would pick the parameter windows. As I mentioned, I'm going to use whatever threshold I want on the window that I want. And so you'll do it on 2 parameters, right? And so that is potentially a downside. I know some people are just going to say, I want to optimize over every single parameter. Well, for this particular optimization, you can do those windows, but for this particular surface plot, you're going to only be able to compare once. So you could go and collect all the data for all of those and then just change your inputs for the X and Y axis and do the comparison against those and totally do that. That would be fine. However, one of the other things that I'm adding in here includes a walk forward type of optimization. So you'll be able to define your stages. So if you know what walk forward, I'm just giving a brief example here. If you know what walk forward testing is, you're going to pick, for example, a 70% window, you'll pick a window and it can be in bars, which translates to time, obviously, because it's time series data. And you would take 70% of that data and you would optimize over that window. And then you would test it over the full 100% of data and see if the last 30%, which would be considered out of sample data, still works, or if it actually breaks the strategy. And that's considered one stage in a walk forward optimization process. And so you can have multiple stages for that. And so this will allow you to do that. So you can define the number of stages that you have, and then you can also define the size of your in-sample and out-of-sample data. And then going back to the surface plot, even though this is just one screenshot, I'm not showing everything. Eventually, when I have this released, I will just probably do a demo of the whole thing. But when you're doing that walk forward optimization, it's going to pick by default, it's going to pick the best value based on the metric that you're optimizing for. So in the example that I used, we're using net profit. So if that's the parameter that you're optimizing for, it would just pick the best one, and you can run into some robustness issues. Now, walk forward optimization is intended to help you figure out if that fails or succeeds based on applying the out of sample data, and then you might throw that away. Now, one thing that I decided to introduce this idea for goes back to this surface plot where, well, because the test in itself, the walk forward optimization might have been flawed in itself because it picked just the best value, where the best value might not have been the most robust value. And so there's some code in there as well to try to avoid picking local highs that would not be robust based on the data that you see from the surface plot or from the heat map. And so you can also test that out where it would say do a walk forward optimization, but try to avoid any spike point that would be the highest net profit value. So you can pick a lower net profit value if that value looks like it might be more robust based on the data compared against the parameters here. So of course this is in that work is just in its infancy, but I think it might be super useful in terms of helping create more robust strategies. And obviously then you're doing optimization and finding strategies that hopefully are more likely to work in forward testing as opposed to just blowing up in forward testing, even if you do walk forward optimization, because the idea after that is to apply forward testing. So that was a fairly long conversation about that. I did want to jump into the charts, so let's see. So this is going to be a little bit longer. I was thinking about just leaving it there, but I think what I'm going to do is I still want to jump into the charts. So if you're not interested in checking out the charts and you're just interested in the update, there you go. There's the update. I'm still going to go into the charts and just look at that for myself. And so let's go ahead and turn. Oh, one more thing. Before I do that, I wanted to apply my background image. I see some of the other YouTubers do this kind of thing. And because in this case, I was like doing some different visuals as opposed to just like showing my browser the whole time, I thought it'd be cool to kind of add my background. It's something I wanted to do for a while. So I'm going to hide this demo image. This is really what my background image looks like. I made this based on like the old branding that I had, and then I started using Linux. And so I just threw in this duck thing. I thought it was kind of cool. But I am interested. I have this other one since I did the copper branding redesign. I've got this copper version as well. I'm not sure if I like this one better, or if I like the purple one better. The purple one's the one that I've mainly kept on my desktop when I'm using it. But I'm just curious if you guys need something to comment about, because you just don't comment otherwise. Tell me which one of these images you think looks better. So I thought that the copper one would come out pretty cool. I think it looks cool, but it's got that warmer feel to it, and I think personally I just prefer the cooler feel of this purple. So let me know what you think about that. I'm gonna leave that one on there right now. I'm just gonna hide this one so we're not doing as much processing, and then we're gonna jump into the charts. So again, now if you're not interested in looking at the charts or anything like that, all good. Feel free to bounce out, and we'll catch you on the next one, which should be when I'm doing the different tests for the different editors. So jumping into Bitcoin real quick. I think the last time I'd been making a video, it's been a couple weeks, so I think we were getting up here testing the 200s, and we didn't set up on the 200s. We ended up just dropping down, and so I think that was a pretty strong indication that this is failing. You had the 821 cross down, so that was one signal you could have used to get out. You had a couple break lower in the if you're using the Gann swing indicator here, and so that was another signal to get out. You had this line, which I didn't particularly like, because I think if I was going to draw this line, can't get this to draw the way I want. If you use wicks or closes, I think the wicks maybe looked a little bit more valid here. You would have been out probably a little bit later, but you still would have had that trend line down there. I had it drawn up here originally. Probably just get rid of that line, honestly. I don't really like it. But maybe I'll, for the time being, kind of kick it over here just to see how it draws out. That's about close, right? So you would have got out here. It looks like you had your retest and your fail, so that looks pretty good. The reason I wanted to update that is because I just wanted to mention is I wouldn't be surprised to see this come touch up 200s, and then we'll see if we're going to actually break through. From any pattern perspective, it looks like that could just turn into a big box, for example. And then I haven't updated these because these are not correct anymore because we're now bearish on, is it right? Bullish, yeah, bearish on everything still. So I didn't update them. I must not have updated them before. So one thing I will say is if you're looking, if you are looking on a little longer time frames here, we had that dump back in February, and then we are now lower. And that is even on a closing basis. We did close lower, even though we're higher now. We closed lower than we did before, and so you have this potential for some bullish divergence here. And again, that would be on longer time frame. I'm looking on the daily, but these should still show up on the weekly. Let's take a double just to check here. Yeah, so on the weekly, it hasn't quite confirmed. We're going to need a few more candles, so this turns around green. Oscillators could be coming down a little bit, so that's there's not a lot of confluence there for those, but that looks there. That is what it is. And then yeah, a ton of volume on that dump too, so good to see that it held with that much volume, I guess I would say. And then as far as that goes, I don't think I'm going to jump into any other charts. It looks like things are looking pretty green. I'll probably go through these afterwards, but since this has already been kind of a longer video, I just want to take a real quick peek at Bitcoin and see how that's going. And I'll just do one more kind of shill at the end. I do have that newsletter that puts out the briefs, and so the one thing that I would point out about those, if you are interested in that kind of thing, you can subscribe to, I think this one has, yeah, so I had this on here, which is just showing the calendar, which you can subscribe to the calendar using that, but you also have access to the briefs, and I think the briefs are probably a little bit more interesting. These come out pretty much every day, and the parts that I actually really like about these and I prefer myself are the GAN lessons with some examples, and I've been using some of this for X content as well when I find some interesting details here that are just, I think, good examples of how to apply some GAN strategy concepts or GAN trading concepts, and then also the astrology lessons in here as well. So last chill for that. You can subscribe to these if you go to the briefs homepage and then you scroll down. I'll probably fix this so that you don't have to scroll so long, but if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it'll slowly render here, and then you can just subscribe at the bottom. And I think that might be available on the homepage as well. Yeah, so you can also subscribe on the homepage as well if you go there, but just wanted to do one final shill on that. And anyways, I hope everyone is doing well, and we will catch you on the next one. Peace, quants.